Have you ever wondered what existed before existence itself? Before the first star ignited in the heavens? Before the first wave rolled across an ocean? Before the first breath of wind stirred the void? The ancient Norse people pondered these same questions, and the answers they crafted are among the most haunting, beautiful, and eerily complete creation stories ever told. Tonight we journey back to the very beginning of all things, to a time when the universe was nothing more than a yawning abyss, suspended between fire and ice, waiting for the cosmic forces that would birth gods, giants, and the world we know. This is the complete story of Norse creation, a tale that begins in perfect emptiness and builds, layer by layer, into the intricate cosmos described in the ancient texts of the Eddas. Close your eyes and imagine absolute nothingness. Not darkness, because darkness implies the absence of light, and light does not yet exist. Not silence, because silence requires the concept of sound to define it, and sound has not been born. What the Norse called Ginnungagap was something far more profound than mere emptiness. The word itself carries the weight of primordial mystery. Ginnungagap translates roughly as the yawning void, the gap that gapes, the chasm of such immensity that the human mind struggles to comprehend it. This was the canvas upon which creation would be painted, the stage upon which the cosmic drama would unfold. But Ginnungagap was not entirely alone in this pre-creation state. To its north lay Niflheim, a realm of mist, ice, and impenetrable darkness. The very name Niflheim speaks of fog and shadow, a place where frozen rivers called the Yliviggar flowed endlessly through the gloom. These were not ordinary rivers. They carried venom in their waters, a poisonous substance that would congeal and freeze in the bitter cold of Niflheim. Layer upon layer of toxic ice built up over unimaginable spans of time, spreading slowly but inexorably toward the center of Ginnungagap. Picture sheets of ice forming across the void, each layer crystallizing in formations of frost and rime, creating a wilderness of frozen poison that knew neither life nor warmth. To the south of Ginnungagap blazed Muspelheim, the realm of fire. Where Niflheim was cold beyond measure, Muspelheim burned with heat beyond comprehension. Flames danced and roared in this primordial inferno, sending sparks and burning embers flying into the void. Muspelheim was guarded by Surtur, a being of pure fire who would, according to prophecy, survive until the very end of all things during Ragnarok. But at this earliest moment, Surtur stood watch over his burning realm, his flaming sword casting light into the darkness, the heat from his domain radiating outward into Ginnungagap. For countless ages, these two realms existed in opposition. Ice crept from the north, while fire blazed from the south, and between them yawned the great emptiness of Ginnungagap. There was no time as we understand it, no seasons, no day or night. There was only the slow, inevitable movement of ice and the eternal burning of fire. The cold and the heat reached toward each other across the void, drawn together by forces we can barely name. Destiny, perhaps. Fate. The Norns, those weavers of destiny who would later tend the roots of the world tree, had not yet come into being, but their threads were somehow already in motion, pulling the strands of creation taut. And then, in the place where fire met ice, something remarkable happened. The frost from Niflheim encountered the heat from Muspelheim, and in that meeting, the ice began to melt. Drops of water formed from the thawing rime, each droplet carrying within it the potential for life. These were not ordinary drops. They were infused with the venom from the Yliviggar, transformed by the fire from Muspelheim, suspended in the void of Ginnungagap. They represented something entirely new in the cosmos: change, transformation, the possibility of becoming. The drops coalesced and grew, accumulating mass and form. From this primordial fluid emerged the first being to exist in the Norse cosmos. His name was Ymir, though he would also be called Aurgelmir, which means something like gravel screamer or mud seether. The meaning of his primary name, Ymir, has been translated as screamer or twin, and both meanings carry significance. Ymir was the personification of chaos itself, the embodiment of undifferentiated potential. He was enormous beyond measure, a frost giant born from the fusion of opposites, neither fully of ice nor of fire, but somehow both and neither. Ymir's form was strange and primordial. The ancient texts tell us he was hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female characteristics, for the concepts of sexual differentiation had not yet been established in the cosmos. This was not seen as unusual in the Norse understanding, but rather as fitting for the very first being. Separation and distinction would come later, imposed by the gods, but Ymir existed before such categories. As he slept there in the void, Ymir began to sweat, and from his sweat came more giants. Under his left arm, a male and a female giant took form. His legs bred with each other, producing a son with 6 heads. These were the first generations of the frost giants, the Jotnar, beings of immense power and chaotic nature who would populate the realm of Jotunheim and stand in eternal opposition to the gods who would later emerge. But Ymir was not alone for long. From the same thawing frost that produced the first giant, another being took shape. She was Audhumla, the primeval cow, and she was no ordinary creature. Her name likely means hornless cow rich in milk, though later depictions would often, ironically, show her with horns. Audhumla was enormous, a cosmic being whose very existence spoke to the importance of cattle in Norse and broader Germanic culture. From her udders flowed 4 rivers of milk, warm and nourishing, that sustained Ymir and allowed him to grow strong. These rivers of milk were not merely sustenance, but represented abundance, fertility, and the life-giving properties that would characterize the created world. Audhumla herself needed sustenance, and she found it in the salty rime-stones that filled the void. She began to lick these salt-encrusted blocks of ice, drawn to them by instinct or design. Her warm tongue slowly melted the ice, and as she licked, something extraordinary began to emerge. On the first day of her licking, strands of hair appeared in the melting ice. On the second day, a head became visible. On the third day, a complete man stood revealed, freed from his icy prison by Audhumla's patient work. This man was called Búri, a name that means progenitor or producer. He was tall, strong, and handsome, possessing a beauty and nobility that set him apart from the giants who had sprung from Ymir's sweat. Búri was the first of a different kind of being, the ancestor of what would become the Asir gods. Where Ymir and his offspring represented chaos and raw, undifferentiated power, Búri embodied the potential for order, consciousness, and deliberate creation. His emergence from the ice, revealed by Audhumla's licking, suggests a kind of purposeful unveiling, as though he had been waiting there all along, preserved in the frozen waters until the moment was right for him to step forth. Búri soon had a son named Bor, whose name simply means son. The texts do not tell us who Bor's mother was, leaving that part of the story shrouded in mystery. Bor grew to adulthood in this strange world of ice, fire, milk, and giants, and eventually took a wife. Her name was Bestla, and she was the daughter of a giant named Bolthorn, whose name means baleful thorn or evil thorn. This detail is significant because it reveals something crucial about the nature of the Norse gods. They were not purely separate from the giants, but were in fact related to them. Bestla was a giantess, a daughter of the very race that had sprung from Ymir, yet she married Bor, the son of Búri, and from their union came the 3 most important gods in Norse mythology. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons. The eldest was Odin, who would become the All-Father, the chief of the gods, lord of wisdom, war, poetry, and magic. The second son was Vili, whose name means will, and the third and youngest was Ve, whose name means holy or temple. These 3 brothers would change everything. They would take the raw materials of the primordial cosmos and reshape them into the ordered world that gods, giants, and eventually humans would inhabit. As Odin, Vili, and Ve grew to maturity, they looked upon the world as it existed. Ymir lay there enormous and passive, drinking the milk of Audhumla, while more and more frost giants spawned from his sleeping form. The brothers saw that Ymir and his progeny represented a kind of stagnation, a world locked in its primordial state, with no room for growth, change, or the kind of conscious order they envisioned. The brothers made a decision that would echo through all of time. They would kill Ymir and use his body to create something new. The battle between the three brothers and the primordial giant must have been tremendous, though the ancient texts give us few details of the actual combat. We know only that Odin, Vili, and Ve succeeded in slaying Ymir, and that his wounds opened, and from them poured a flood of blood so immense that it drowned nearly all the frost giants. The torrent of blood surged through Ginnungagap, a crimson deluge that swept away the children of Ymir. Only two survived this cataclysmic flood, a giant named Bergelmir and his unnamed wife. They climbed aboard a hollowed tree trunk, a vessel that served as both boat and coffin, and rode out the blood flood. From these two survivors would descend all future generations of the frost giants, the Jotnar, beings of immense power and chaotic nature who would populate the realm of Jotunheim and stand in eternal opposition to the gods who would later emerge. But Ymir was not alone for long. From the same thawing frost that produced the first giant, another being took shape. She was Audhumla, the primeval cow, and she was no ordinary creature. Her name likely means hornless cow rich in milk, though later depictions would often, ironically, show her with horns. Audhumla was enormous, a cosmic being whose very existence spoke to the importance of cattle in Norse and broader Germanic culture. From her udders flowed 4 rivers of milk, warm and nourishing, that sustained Ymir and allowed him to grow strong. These rivers of milk were not merely sustenance, but represented abundance, fertility, and the life-giving properties that would characterize the created world. Audhumla herself needed sustenance, and she found it in the salty rime-stones that filled the void. She began to lick these salt-encrusted blocks of ice, drawn to them by instinct or design. Her warm tongue slowly melted the ice, and as she licked, something extraordinary began to emerge. On the first day of her licking, strands of hair appeared in the melting ice. On the second day, a head became visible. On the third day, a complete man stood revealed, freed from his icy prison by Audhumla's patient work. This man was called Búri, a name that means progenitor or producer. He was tall, strong, and handsome, possessing a beauty and nobility that set him apart from the giants who had sprung from Ymir's sweat. Búri was the first of a different kind of being, the ancestor of what would become the Aesir gods. Where Ymir and his offspring represented chaos and raw, undifferentiated power, Búri embodied the potential for order, consciousness, and deliberate creation. His emergence from the ice, revealed by Audhumla's licking, suggests a kind of purposeful unveiling, as though he had been waiting there all along, preserved in the frozen waters until the moment was right for him to step forth. Búri soon had a son named Bor, whose name simply means son. The texts do not tell us who Bor's mother was, leaving that part of the story shrouded in mystery. Bor grew to adulthood in this strange world of ice, fire, milk, and giants, and eventually took a wife. Her name was Bestla, and she was the daughter of a giant named Bolthorn, whose name means baleful thorn or evil thorn. This detail is significant because it reveals something crucial about the nature of the Norse gods. They were not purely separate from the giants, but were in fact related to them. Bestla was a giantess, a daughter of the very race that had sprung from Ymir, yet she married Bor, the son of Búri, and from their union came the 3 most important gods in Norse mythology. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons. The eldest was Odin, who would become the All-Father, the chief of the gods, lord of wisdom, war, poetry, and magic. The second son was Vili, whose name means will, and the third and youngest was Ve, whose name means holy or temple. These 3 brothers would change everything. They would take the raw materials of the primordial cosmos and reshape them into the ordered world that gods, giants, and eventually humans would inhabit. As Odin, Vili, and Ve grew to maturity, they looked upon the world as it existed. Ymir lay there, enormous and passive, drinking the milk of Audhumla, while more and more frost giants spawned from his sleeping form. The brothers saw that Ymir and his progeny represented a kind of stagnation, a world. From Ymir's flesh, the brothers formed the earth itself. The ground beneath our feet, the soil that grows our crops, the land on which we build our homes, all of this was once the meat and muscle of the primordial giant. The earth was not dead matter, but transformed flesh, still carrying within it something of Ymir's chaotic nature. From his bones they fashioned the mountains. When you see a great mountain range stretching across the horizon, you are looking at Ymir's skeleton, his structural frame now providing structure to the world. His teeth and fragments of broken bones became rocks and stones, scattered across the landscape. The boulders and pebbles that dot the earth are all that remains of Ymir's shattered jaw and splintered skeleton. From Ymir's blood, the brothers created the seas, lakes, and rivers. All the waters of the world, from the mightiest ocean to the smallest stream, flow with what was once the lifeblood of the first giant. They used this blood to encircle the world, creating a vast ocean that would serve as a boundary between the ordered realm of gods and men and the chaos beyond. This ocean would later be home to Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, a child of Loki who grew so large he could encircle the entire world and grasp his own tail in his mouth. Ymir's skull became the sky itself. The brothers lifted this massive bone dome and set it high above the earth, creating the heavens. To hold the sky in place, they positioned a dwarf at each of the four corners. These dwarves were named Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, their names simply meaning north, south, east, and west. These four brothers would forever support the weight of the heavens, ensuring that the sky did not collapse down upon the earth. Picture them standing at the cardinal points, bearing their eternal burden, fixing the sky in place so that the cosmic order could be maintained. From Ymir's brain matter, the brothers made the clouds. Every cloud that drifts across the sky, every wisp of vapor that catches the light of the sun, was once a thought that Ymir never had the chance to think. The clouds became the domain of wind and weather, changeable and unpredictable, reflecting something of the chaotic nature of the giant from whom they were formed. Ymir's hair became the trees and all vegetation. The forests that cover the earth, the grass beneath our feet, every leaf and branch and root, all grew from the hair of the fallen giant. This connection between vegetation and hair suggests a deep Norse understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. But the brothers were not finished. They took Ymir's eyebrows and from them fashioned Midgard, the realm of the middle, which would eventually become the home of humanity. The eyebrows formed a protective wall, a fortification against the chaos and danger that lurked beyond. Midgard was positioned in the center of the cosmos, surrounded by the ocean made from Ymir's blood. It was a safe enclosure, relatively protected from the giants and other threats that dwelt in the outer regions of the world. The brothers then turned their attention to light. They took the sparks and burning embers that flew from Muspelheim, those bright fragments of primordial fire, and placed them in midst of Ginnungagap to give light to heaven and earth. Some of these sparks they fixed in place, and these became the stars, eternal and unchanging in their positions. Others they set on courses, giving them paths to follow across the sky. These became the sun and the moon, and the brothers appointed certain individuals to guide these celestial bodies on their eternal journeys. The sun was placed in the care of a goddess named Sol, whose name simply means sun. She drives a chariot pulled by horses across the sky each day, bringing light and warmth to the world. The moon was entrusted to Mani, whose name means moon, and he too drives a chariot through the heavens, marking the passage of time with his waxing and waning. Both Sol and Mani are pursued eternally by wolves. The wolf Skoll chases the sun, while Hati pursues the moon, and it is said that during eclipses, these wolves nearly catch their prey. At Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world, the wolves will finally succeed in their hunt, devouring both sun and moon and plunging the world into darkness.
The brothers also established the cycle of day and night. Night, personified as the giantess Nott, rides across the sky on her horse Hrím-Foxi, whose name means frost-mane. Foam from this horse's bit falls to earth as dew. Day, personified as Dag, rides the horse Skin-Foxi, whose name means shining mane. Light radiates from this horse's mane and tail, illuminating the world. Thus was the rhythm of time established, the alternation of light and darkness that would govern the lives of all who dwelt in the created cosmos.
With the physical structure of the world complete, Odin and his brothers began to organize it into distinct realms. The Norse cosmos was understood to consist of 9 worlds, all connected by and surrounding the great world tree, Yggdrasil. This immense ash tree stands at the center of everything, its branches reaching into the heavens and its roots extending deep into multiple realms. The tree is more than a plant. It is the axis around which the entire cosmos revolves, the connection between all things, the embodiment of life and growth and the cyclical nature of existence. The 9 realms arranged around Yggdrasil were homes to different races and beings. Asgard, high in the branches of the tree, was where the Aesir gods made their dwelling. This was a magnificent realm of golden halls and great fortresses connected to Midgard by the rainbow bridge Bifrost. The most famous hall in Asgard was Valhalla, Odin's Hall of the Slain, where warriors who died bravely in battle were brought by the Valkyries to feast and fight until Ragnarok. Odin ruled Asgard alongside his wife Frigg, and it was from here that the gods watched over the other realms and worked to maintain cosmic order. Midgard was the realm of humans, positioned between the worlds of fire and ice. It was the Middle Earth, the world of mortals, protected by Thor and connected to Asgard by Bifrost. Midgard was surrounded by the great ocean in which dwelt Jormungandr, and beyond the ocean lay the more dangerous and chaotic realms. Jotunheim was the homeland of the giants, the descendants of Ymir and the survivors of the Blood Flood. It was a harsh, mountainous realm of dark forests and frozen peaks where winter's grip never loosened. The giants were not merely enemies of the gods, but also in many ways their counterparts and sometimes their relatives. Many gods had giant blood in their ancestry, and relationships between gods and giants, though often contentious, were not uncommon. Alfheim was the realm of the light elves, beautiful beings associated with light, fertility, and nature. Little is known about this realm from the surviving texts, but it is described as a pleasant place, possibly situated near Asgard. The light elves were generally favorable toward the gods and humans, in contrast to their darker cousins. Svartalfheim, also called Nidavellir, was the realm of the dwarves, master craftsmen who lived beneath the mountains and in deep caverns. The dwarves, despite their small stature, were responsible for creating many of the most powerful objects in Norse mythology, including Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, and the ship Skidbladnir. They were born, according to some accounts, from the maggots that appeared in Ymir's flesh after his death, given intelligence in human form by the gods. Vanaheim was the home of the Vanir, another tribe of gods distinct from the Aesir. The Vanir were associated with fertility, prosperity, and the natural world. Little is known about Vanaheim from the surviving texts, but we know that after a war between the Aesir and Vanir, hostages were exchanged, and the two groups of gods eventually merged, with several Vanir, including Freyr and Freya, taking up residence in Asgard. Niflheim remained as it had been from the beginning, a realm of ice and mist. In Niflheim lay Hvergelmir, the spring from which the poisonous rivers Elivagar flow. One of the roots of Yggdrasil extends into Niflheim, drawing sustenance from the spring despite its poisonous nature. Niflheim was also home to the dragon Nidhogg, who gnawed eternally at the roots of Yggdrasil, trying to bring about the tree's destruction, and with it, the destruction of the cosmos. Muspelheim remained the realm of fire, guarded by Surt. At Ragnarok, Surt and the fire giants would march forth from Muspelheim, crossing the rainbow bridge Bifrost and causing it to collapse behind them. Surt's flames would ultimately consume the world, burning it to ash before it sank beneath the waves. Helheim, sometimes simply called Hel, was the realm of the dead, presided over by a goddess also named Hel. She was the daughter of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, and Odin had placed her in this dark realm beneath the roots of Yggdrasil to receive those who died of sickness or old age. Unlike the Christian concept of hell, Helheim was not a place of punishment, but simply a continuation of existence in a dimmer, quieter form. It was dark and dreary, cold and shrouded in mist, but it lacked the active torment of the Christian underworld.
With the cosmos structured and populated by various beings, Odin and his brothers decided to create one more race, humanity. One day, as the three gods walked along the seashore, they came upon two logs that had washed up on the beach. These were not ordinary pieces of driftwood. One was from an ash tree and the other from an elm, though some sources suggest both were ash. The brothers saw in these logs the potential for something new, for conscious beings who would be distinct from both gods and giants, who would dwell in Midgard and shape their own destinies within the bounds of fate. Odin took the first log and breathed into it the breath of life. This gift of spirit and soul, the animating force that separates the living from the dead, came from the All-Father himself. The log became a living being, but it could not yet think or feel or sense the world around it. Vili stepped forward and gave the second gift, consciousness, intelligence, and movement, the ability to think, to reason, to understand, and to act upon that understanding. This was the gift of will, appropriately given by the god whose name means exactly that. They contributed the final gifts that made these beings truly human. He gave them form and features, faces that could express emotion, the ability to speak and communicate with one another in the senses of hearing and sight. With these gifts, the two logs became the first human beings. The man was named Ask, which means ash tree, and the woman was named Embla. The meaning of Embla's name is less certain, but scholars have suggested it might mean elm or possibly vine. Ask and Embla were given Midgard as their home. The gods clothed them in suitable garments and placed them in the protected realm of the middle, where they would be relatively safe from the chaos of the outer worlds. From these two first humans descended all of humanity. They were the parents of every person who would ever walk the earth, the ancestors from whom all the diverse peoples of Midgard would spring. Unlike the creation story in Christianity, where humanity's first parents brought sin and exile upon themselves, Ask and Embla simply lived. They were given life, intelligence, and senses, and they were placed in a world where they could thrive and multiply. The creation of humanity completed the cosmos. Gods dwelt in Asgard, giants in Jotunheim, dwarves beneath the mountains, elves in their realm of light, and humans in Midgard. The 9 worlds were all connected by Yggdrasil, the great ash tree whose roots and branches bound everything together. But Yggdrasil was more than just a physical structure. It was a living being, constantly growing, constantly striving toward the heavens, while its roots delved into the realms below. 3 roots of Yggdrasil extended into 3 different realms. One root grew into Asgard, reaching toward the well of Urd, where the 3 Norns dwelt. These Norns were named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, their names meaning past, present, and future. They were the weavers of fate, determining the destinies of gods and men alike. Each day they drew water from the well of Urd and mixed it with the clay around the well, then poured this mixture over the roots of Yggdrasil to preserve the tree and prevent it from rotting. Their work was essential to the continued existence of the cosmos, for if Yggdrasil were to die, all the worlds would collapse. A second root of Yggdrasil extended into Jotunheim, reaching toward Mimir's well, the well of wisdom. Odin would later sacrifice one of his eyes to drink from this well, gaining profound knowledge at the cost of his depth perception. The waters of Mimir's well held understanding of all things past and present, though even this wisdom could not prevent the fated events of Ragnarok. The third root reached into Niflheim, down to the spring Hvergelmir, from which the poisonous rivers flow. Here dwelt Nidhogg, the dragon who gnawed constantly at the root, working to undermine the tree and bring about its destruction. Nidhogg was served by numerous serpents who also chewed at the roots, though their names and numbers varied in different tellings. In the branches of Yggdrasil lived various creatures. An eagle perched at the very top of the tree, and between the eagle's eyes sat a hawk named Vedrufólnir. This eagle surveyed all the worlds from its lofty position, seeing everything that transpired below. A squirrel named Ratatoskr ran up and down the trunk of Yggdrasil, carrying messages between the eagle at the top and Nidhogg at the roots. Most often these messages were insults, for the eagle and the dragon despised each other, and Ratatoskr seemed to delight in stirring up strife between them. 4 stags bounded among the branches of Yggdrasil, nibbling at the leaves and bark. Their names were Dain, Dwalin, Dunir, and Durathror. Like Nidhogg's gnawing at the roots, the stag's feeding damaged the tree, and it was only through the Norns' daily care that Yggdrasil continued to survive and thrive despite these constant assaults. The cosmos as created by Odin, Vili, and Ve was not a static paradise, but a dynamic system of opposing forces held in delicate balance. Order and chaos, fire and ice, gods and giants, life and death, all existed in tension with one another. The world created from Ymir's body retained something of his chaotic nature, and the giants who survived the blood flood continued to pose a threat to the ordered realm of Asgard and Midgard. The gods constantly worked to maintain the boundaries between the worlds, to protect humanity and themselves from the forces that would undo creation and return everything to the formless void of Ginnungagap. This tension between order and chaos was not seen as something that could be permanently resolved. The Norse understanding of time was cyclical rather than linear. Events occurred in patterns, destinies were woven by the Norns, and the future, though not immutable in every detail, followed certain inevitable paths. The most inevitable of these paths led to Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the forces of chaos would finally overwhelm the forces of order and the world would be destroyed. Ragnarok was not a surprise to the gods. They knew it was coming. The prophecy had been revealed to Odin by a Volva, a seeress, and the details were grim. The coming of Ragnarok would be heralded by signs and portents. First would come the Fimbulwinter, a terrible winter that would last for 3 years with no summer in between. Snow would fall from every direction, and the cold would be unbearable. Humanity would suffer greatly during this time, and the hardship would cause people to abandon their morals and laws. Brother would fight brother, father would slay son, and son would kill father. Greed and violence would rule the world. The heavens themselves would signal the approaching end. The wolves, Skull and Hati, who had chased the sun and moon since the beginning of time, would finally catch their prey and devour them. The world would be plunged into darkness. Stars would disappear from the sky. The great tree Yggdrasil would shudder and shake, causing earthquakes across all the realms. Mountains would crumble and fall. The tremors would be so powerful that they would break the chains that bound Loki and the monstrous wolf Fenrir. Loki had been bound by the gods as punishment for his role in the death of Balder, the shining god whom everyone loved. The gods had chained Loki to a rock beneath a serpent whose venom dripped continuously on his face. Loki's wife Sigyn stood by him holding a bowl to catch the venom, but when the bowl filled and she had to turn away to empty it, the venom fell on Loki's face, causing him to writhe in agony. His thrashing was said to cause earthquakes in Midgard. But at Ragnarok, Loki would break free from his bonds, and he would lead the forces of chaos against the gods. Fenrir, the great wolf son of Loki, had been bound by the gods with a magical ribbon called Gleipnir, made by the dwarves from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Despite being thin as silk, Gleipnir was stronger than any chain, and Fenrir could not break it. But at Ragnarok, even Gleipnir would fail, and Fenrir would break free to wreak havoc on the gods. The sea would rise up and flood the land, for Jormungandr, the world serpent, would leave the ocean depths and crawl onto the land, thrashing and causing huge waves. His brother, Fenrir, would emerge as well, his jaws gaping so wide that the upper jaw reached the sky while the lower scraped the earth. Fire would pour from his eyes and nostrils. Together, the children of Loki would advance toward Asgard. A ship called Naglfar would sail forth from the east, carrying an army of giants and the dead from Helheim. This ship was made from the fingernails and toenails of dead people, a detail that encouraged the Norse to ensure that nails were trimmed before burial to delay the completion of this dreadful vessel. Loki himself with Captain Naglfar, leading the forces of chaos toward the final battlefield. The sky would split open, revealing the realm of Muspelheim, and Surt would ride forth at the head of the fire giants, his sword blazing brighter than the sun. They would cross the rainbow bridge Bifrost, and under their weight and the heat of their flames, the bridge would shatter and collapse. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, who could hear grass growing and wool sprouting on sheep's backs, would sound his great horn Gjallarhorn to alert the gods to the coming attack. The gods would gather their forces and prepare for battle, even though they knew the prophecy foretold their defeat. This willingness to fight despite certain death is a key aspect of the Norse worldview, a warrior culture that valued brave resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. Odin would lead the Einherjar, the warriors who had died gloriously in battle and been brought to Valhalla, out onto the battlefield called Vigrid. Thor would take up his hammer Mjolnir. Freyr would arm himself for battle, though he had once given away his sword to win the giantess Gerd as his wife, and he would fight instead with a stag's antlers. Tyr, the god of war who had sacrificed his hand to bind Fenrir, would join the battle despite his disability. The final battle would be catastrophic. Odin would ride toward Fenrir, attempting to strike down the great wolf, but the prophecy was clear: Fenrir would devour the All-Father, swallowing him whole. Odin's death would not go unavenged, however. His son, Vidar, the silent god, would step forward and place one foot in Fenrir's lower jaw. Vidar wore a shoe made from all the leather scraps that had been thrown away since the beginning of time, giving him the leverage to tear Fenrir's jaws apart, killing the wolf. Thor would engage in combat with Jormungandr, the serpent he had encountered before in various adventures. Thor and the serpent were destined to be the death of each other. Thor would strike Jormungandr with Mjolnir, delivering a fatal blow to the serpent. But in its death throes, Jormungandr would spray so much venom that Thor would stagger back 9 paces before falling dead from the poison. Freyr would fight against Surt, but without his sword, the god would fall to the fire giant's blade. Tyr and the hellhound Garm would slay each other. Heimdall and Loki would kill one another after their long enmity finally came to its deadly conclusion. God after god would fall, and the forces of chaos would rampage across the battlefield. With the gods fallen or scattered, Surt would raise his flaming sword and set the entire world ablaze. Fire would sweep across all 9 realms, consuming Asgard and Midgard, the forests and fields, the halls of gods and homes of men. The earth itself would begin to break apart under the assault. Earthquakes would split the ground, the seas would rise higher still, drowning the land. Everything would be destroyed, burned and drowned and shattered. The world created by Odin and his brothers from Ymir's body would be unmade, the order they had imposed upon chaos collapsing back into formlessness. The earth would sink beneath the waves, disappearing into the primordial waters, and darkness would cover everything. This could be the end of the story, and in some versions of the myth it is. The world ends, the gods die, everything returns to the void. But other accounts tell of what comes after the destruction. They speak of renewal and rebirth, of a new world emerging from the ruins of the old. After the fires have burned out and the waters have calmed, after sufficient time has passed in the darkness, the earth will rise again from the sea. It will be green and fertile, more beautiful than before. Grass will grow without being sown. Fields will produce crops without being tended. The sun will return to the sky, not the old sun that was devoured by Skoll, but her daughter, who will shine just as brightly as her mother did. Not all the gods will have perished in the destruction. Some will survive to see the new world. Vidar will live, having avenged his father. Vali, another of Odin's sons, will survive as well. Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, will inherit their father's hammer, Mjolnir, and carry it into the new age. Balder, who had died before Ragnarok through Loki's treachery, will return from Helheim, restored to life. His brother Hod, who had unknowingly thrown the mistletoe dart that killed Balder, will also return. These gods will gather in Idavall, a field in the midst of where Asgard once stood, and they will speak together about the old times, about the great events that transpired, about Odin and his wisdom and the runes of power. 2 humans will also survive the destruction by hiding themselves in a place called Hodmimir's Wood, possibly within Yggdrasil itself, which somehow endures despite the cosmic conflagration. Their names will be Lif and Lifthrasir, meaning life and eager for life. They will emerge from their hiding place to find a new world, green and fertile, ready to be inhabited. From these 2 will descend a new human race, populating the renewed Midgard. They will feed on the morning dew until other food becomes available. The cycle will begin again, creation from destruction, order from chaos, but carrying with it the memory of what came before. The story of Norse creation is fundamentally a story about transformation and cycles. The universe begins with the meeting of opposites, ice and fire, producing the primordial giant Ymir. Ymir is slain and transformed into the world we know. That world exists in constant tension between order and chaos, gods and giants, with the great tree Yggdrasil holding everything together. Eventually, chaos overwhelms order, the world is destroyed, but from that destruction comes renewal. The new world that emerges is not a return to the primordial void of Ginnungagap, but a fresh iteration of the same cosmic pattern. This cyclical view of time and existence is distinctly different from the linear progression found in many other mythological traditions. There is no paradise lost that must be regained, no original sin that must be atoned for, no final judgment that will sort souls into eternal categories. Instead, there is a pattern of creation, existence, destruction, and renewal that may repeat indefinitely. The Norse cosmos is subject to fate, to the weaving of the Norns, but within that framework there is room for courage, for choice, for heroic action, even in the face of certain doom. The importance of sacrifice permeates the creation narrative. Ymir must die so that the world can be made. Odin will later sacrifice himself to himself, hanging on Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. He will give up an eye to drink from Mimir's well and gain wisdom. Tyr will sacrifice his hand to bind Fenrir. The gods who fight at Ragnarok know they will die, but they choose to fight anyway. This emphasis on willing sacrifice, on giving something precious to gain something even more valuable, suggests a worldview that understood nothing of worth comes without cost. The creation story also reveals a Norse understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. The world is made from Ymir's body, meaning the ground we walk on, the water we drink, and the air we breathe were once part of a living being. The gods themselves are related to the giants they oppose. Humanity is created by gods, but placed in the middle realm between the divine and the chaotic. Yggdrasil connects all 9 worlds, its roots and branches binding everything into a unified whole. Nothing exists in isolation. Every action has consequences that ripple through the cosmos. Every being, from the highest god to the smallest creature, plays a role in the maintenance or destruction of cosmic order. The Norse creation myth is preserved primarily in 2 main sources, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. The Poetic Edda is a collection of Old Norse poems from the medieval manuscript known as the Codex Regius, which dates to around 1300 AD, but contains material much older. The most important poem for the creation narrative is the Voluspa, which means prophecy of the seers. In this poem, a Volva recounts the history of the cosmos from creation to Ragnarok and beyond, speaking to Odin, who has summoned her from the dead specifically to hear her prophecy. The Prose Edda, also called the Younger Edda, was written by Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic historian and poet, around 1220. Snorri's work was intended as a handbook for poets, preserving the old stories and mythological references that traditional Norse poetry relied upon. By Snorri's time, Iceland had been Christian for over 200 years, and there was a danger that the old myths would be forgotten. Snorri wrote his Edda partly to preserve this cultural heritage, though his interpretation was inevitably influenced by his Christian worldview. Comparing these 2 sources reveals interesting details and variations. The Voluspa provides a more poetic and elusive account, while Snorri's Prose Edda offers more explicit narrative detail. Sometimes they agree closely, other times they provide different information or emphasis. Modern scholars must carefully compare these sources and consider archaeological evidence, comparative mythology, and linguistic analysis to reconstruct Norse beliefs about creation as accurately as possible. One fascinating aspect of Norse creation mythology is the role of poetry and language in establishing and maintaining cosmic order. Odin is not only the god of war and wisdom, but also the god of poetry. The creation of the world required not just physical transformation of Ymir's body, but also the imposition of meaning, of names and categories. When Odin and his brothers gave Ask and Embla the gift of speech, they were providing humanity with a way to participate in this ordering of reality through language. The runes, which Odin gained through his self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil, were not merely an alphabet, but magical symbols that could affect reality itself. To know the true name of something was to have power over it. This connection between language, knowledge, and power runs throughout Norse mythology and is tied directly to the act of creation. The world was not simply made, it was spoken into specific forms, named, and thereby given meaning. The dwarves, those master craftsmen born from Ymir's corpse, play an interesting role in the cosmic order. They're associated with the earth, living beneath mountains and working with stone and metal. Their creation of powerful artifacts for the gods suggests that even the divine beings require assistance from others to maintain their position. Thor's hammer, the most famous weapon in Norse mythology, was made by dwarves, not by Thor himself. Odin's spear, Ymir, which never missed its target, was dwarf-made. The ship Skidbladnir, large enough to hold all the gods, yet able to be folded up and put in a pocket, came from dwarf workshops. This reliance on dwarf craftsmanship introduces a democratic element in the Norse cosmic hierarchy. The gods are powerful, but they are not omnipotent. They need help from others. They rely on the Norns to maintain Yggdrasil. They depend on dwarfen skill to create their weapons and tools. They will eventually need the surviving gods and the 2 human refugees to repopulate the cosmos after Ragnarok. Power is distributed throughout the system, and cooperation is necessary for the maintenance of order. The giants represent something more complex than simple antagonists to the gods. Yes, they are often portrayed as threats, as forces of chaos that must be opposed, but they are also the source of wisdom and knowledge. Mimir, who guards the Well of Wisdom, is a giant, or closely associated with giants. Odin's own mother was a giantess. Many gods have relationships with giantesses, sometimes resulting in powerful offspring. The boundary between gods and giants is porous, not absolute. This complexity suggests that the Norse understood chaos not as something to be completely eliminated, but as something to be held in check, to be balanced against order. Too much order might lead to stagnation. Too much chaos leads to destruction. The dynamic tension between the two creates the conditions for life and growth. Yggdrasil itself embodies this balance, constantly growing upward while being constantly attacked by creatures gnawing at its roots and branches, surviving only through the daily care of the Norns. The concept of weird, often translated as fate or destiny, is central to the Norse worldview. The Norns weave the fates of gods and men, and even Odin cannot escape what is fated for him. Yet this does not mean that individuals are passive victims of cosmic forces. The Norse heroes are celebrated precisely because they face their fate with courage and dignity, choosing how they will meet their destiny even if they cannot change what that destiny is. Odin knows he will be devoured by Fenrir at Ragnarok, but he does not hide or flee. He rides out to meet the wolf, choosing to face his end as a warrior should. This acceptance of fate while still maintaining agency is a subtle and sophisticated philosophical position. It acknowledges the reality of forces beyond individual control while insisting that how one responds to those forces matters deeply. The quality of one's character, the courage one displays, the loyalty one shows to kin and companions, these things have value even in a cosmos that will eventually be destroyed. The creation and maintenance of Midgard, the realm of humanity, shows the gods' protective relationship with mortals. The gods did not have to create humanity, they choose to do so, fashioning Ask and Embla from driftwood and giving them gifts that made them fully human. They placed these first people in Midgard, a protected realm surrounded by fortifications made from Ymir's eyebrows. Thor, the most popular god among common people, spent much of his time defending Midgard and Asgard from giants, smashing their skulls with his hammer and driving them back to Jotunheim. Yet humanity in Norse mythology is not the center of creation. Humans were not made first, nor were they made in the image of the gods. They were created somewhat as an afterthought, after the cosmos had already been established and populated with gods, giants, elves, and dwarves. Humans occupy the middle realm, both geographically and metaphorically. They are above the chaotic forces of nature, but below the gods in power and wisdom. This middle position is both humble and dignified. Humans matter enough for the gods to protect them, but they are not so important that the cosmos revolves around them. The imagery of Norse creation mythology is stark and powerful. The yawning void of Ginnungagap, neither light nor dark, neither something nor nothing. The meeting of fire and ice producing steam and sparks and the first glimmerings of life. The primordial cow licking salt blocks, gradually revealing a man encased in ice. The murder of Ymir and the flood of blood drowning nearly all his children. The careful, methodical transformation of the giant's corpse into every feature of the natural world. These images have a primal quality that speaks to something deep in human consciousness. Water appears again and again in the Norse creation story, emphasizing its importance. The poisonous rivers Elivandr flow from the beginning. Audhumla's milk nourishes Ymir. The flood of Ymir's blood destroys the first generation of giants. The seas and lakes are formed from that same blood. The well of Urd and Mimir's well provide sustenance and wisdom. At Ragnarok, the seas will rise and drown the land. Water is both life-giving and destructive, a substance of transformation and change. Similarly, fire is present from the beginning in Muspelheim and will be present at the end when Surtur's flames consume the world. Fire represents change, destruction, but also energy and the possibility of transformation. Ice represents stasis, preservation, the absence of change. The interaction between fire and ice, between change and stillness, between energy and stillness produces the conditions for existence. The role of women in the creation narrative, while limited by the male-centered nature of the sources, is not absent. Bestla, though barely mentioned, is crucial as the mother of Odin, Vili, and Ve. The Norns, who are female, control fate itself, determining the destinies of gods and men. Frigg, Odin's wife, knows all fates, though she speaks none of them. The Volva, who recounts the creation story to Odin, is a woman, a seeress with knowledge that even the All-Father must seek out. Night is personified as a giantess. Sol drives the sun chariot across the sky. Female figures are woven throughout the narrative, often in roles associated with knowledge, fate, and the deeper mysteries of existence. The creation of time itself is an important aspect of the myth. Before the creation, there was no time as we understand it. Events occurred, but in what sequence or over what duration is unclear. The establishment of the sun and moon, day and night, created the framework within which time could be measured and experienced. The Norns, whose names represent past, present, and future, emerged only after the cosmos was created. Time, in the Norse understanding, is not an absolute container in which events occur, but something that came into being along with the ordered cosmos. The Norse creation story also contains elements of cosmic architecture. The world is not simply earth and sky, but a complex structure of 9 interconnected realms arranged around the axis of Yggdrasil. This vertical organization, with some realms in the branches, some around the trunk, and some among the roots, creates a 3-dimensional cosmos with layers and levels. Travel between realms is possible, but often difficult, requiring magic, special knowledge, or divine intervention. Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, provides one such connection between Midgard and Asgard. Other passages are more obscure, known only to those with special knowledge or powers. The destruction and renewal cycle of Ragnarok and its aftermath introduces an element of hope into what might otherwise be a bleak vision. Yes, the gods will die, the world will be destroyed, but something will survive, something will persist. The pattern will continue, though in a new form. This suggests a Norse understanding that while specific things are temporary and will eventually pass away, the underlying patterns of existence are more durable. Form changes, but something essential continues. In contemplating the Norse creation myths, we are not merely exploring ancient stories, but encountering a sophisticated attempt to answer the fundamental questions of existence. Where did we come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the nature of the cosmos we inhabit? What is our place in that cosmos? How should we live in the face of certain death? The Norse answers to these questions are distinctive, reflecting the culture and environment of the people who developed them. The harsh climate of Scandinavia, where winter can be deadly and survival requires courage and cooperation, shaped these myths. The importance of kinship bonds, the value placed on bravery in the face of adversity, the acceptance of a cyclical view of time marked by the seasons, all these elements of Norse culture are reflected in the creation myths. Yet these stories also transcend their specific cultural origins, speaking to universal human concerns and questions. What makes the Norse creation myths particularly compelling is their combination of grandeur and intimacy. The scale is cosmic, encompassing multiple worlds and beings of godlike power, yet the details are often surprisingly personal and specific. We're told not just that the world was made, but exactly which part of Ymir's body became which feature of the landscape. We know the names of the 4 dwarves who hold up the sky, the squirrel who runs up and down Yggdrasil, the wolves who chase the sun and moon. This attention to detail creates a world that feels complete and real, a cosmos with texture and specificity. The Norse creation narrative also differs from many other mythologies in its lack of moral judgment about the primordial state. Ginnungagap is not described as evil or wrong, merely as what was before creation. Ymir is not a demon or a figure of evil, but simply the first being, born from the interaction of opposites. His murder by Odin and his brothers is presented as necessary for creation, but the text does not moralize about it. The giants who descended from Ymir are opponents of the gods, but not inherently evil. Some are wise, some are foolish, some are dangerous, and some are helpful. The cosmos operates on principles of power, kinship, and fate, rather than on moral absolutes of good and evil. This morally complex universe is perhaps closer to lived human experience than mythologies that present clear divisions between good and evil forces. The real world often presents us with ambiguous situations, where competing goods conflict, where our allies have flaws, and where our enemies may have legitimate grievances. The Norse myths acknowledge this complexity while still maintaining that some things matter, that courage is better than cowardice, that keeping oaths is important, that protecting one's kin and community is a duty. The symbolism of the tree Yggdrasil is particularly rich and multi-layered. Trees were central to Germanic and Norse culture, providing wood for building and fuel, food from nuts and fruits, and shelter. The world tree takes this everyday importance and elevates it to cosmic significance. Yggdrasil is the axis mundi, the world axis, the connection between all realms. Its roots reach down into the dark places, while its branches reach up into the light. It is home to numerous creatures, from the eagle at the top to the serpent at the bottom, with the squirrel running between them carrying messages of conflict. The constant attacks on Yggdrasil from multiple directions represent the ongoing assault of chaos on order, the natural tendency of systems to break down and decay. The Norns' daily care of the tree represents the constant work required to maintain order against the forces of entropy. This is a profoundly realistic view of cosmic maintenance, one that acknowledges that order is not the natural state of things, but something that must be actively preserved through continuous effort. The ash tree, specifically, was significant in Norse culture. Ash wood was prized for making spear shafts, the primary weapon of the Viking Age warrior. The first man, Ask, was made from ash, creating a connection between humanity, warfare, and the world tree itself. This interconnection of symbols creates layers of meaning that would have resonated deeply with the original audience of these myths. As we reflect on the entirety of the Norse creation narrative, from the primordial void to the creation of the cosmos to the eventual destruction and renewal, we see a complete mythological system that addressed the needs and questions of the people who believed in it. These stories explained natural phenomena, provided a framework for understanding human existence, offered models for heroic behavior, and located individual human lives within a vast cosmic context. The preservation of these myths through the medieval period into the present day is itself remarkable. By the time Snorri Sturluson wrote his prose Edda, Christianity had been the official religion of Iceland for over 2 centuries. Yet Snorri felt it was important to record these old stories, to preserve the cultural heritage of his ancestors, even though he himself was a Christian. The Codex Regius manuscript that preserves the poetic Edda survived through centuries in Iceland, passing through various hands until it was eventually recognized for its importance and preserved. Today, these myths continue to resonate with people around the world. They have influenced countless works of literature, music, art, and popular culture. The Marvel Comics version of Thor and the other Norse gods, while very different from the mythological originals, has introduced millions of people to these characters and stories. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings drew heavily on Norse mythology for names, concepts, and themes. Modern neo-pagan movements have revived worship of the Norse gods, though often with significant reinterpretation. The academic study of Norse mythology continues to reveal new insights and interpretations. Scholars debate the meanings of obscure terms, trace the evolution of stories through different versions, and explore connections to other Germanic and Indo-European mythologies. Archaeological discoveries of artifacts and sites associated with Norse religion provide material evidence to compare with the literary sources. Linguistic analysis reveals etymologies and wordplay that would have been apparent to original audiences but are hidden from modern readers. What remains clear through all these studies and interpretations is that the Norse creation myths represent a sophisticated and complete mythological system. They are not primitive or naive attempts to explain the world, but rather carefully crafted narratives that encode deep wisdom about existence, change, sacrifice, courage, and the nature of reality. They present a cosmos that is dynamic rather than static, where even the gods are subject to fate, where courage in the face of certain doom is the highest virtue, and where destruction is always followed by renewal. As you drift towards sleep, let your mind wander through these ancient stories. Picture the yawning void of Ginnungagap, empty and expectant. Feel the cold of Niflheim and the heat of Muspelheim as they reach toward each other across the emptiness. Watch as the frost begins to melt and drip, forming the first living being in the cosmos. See Ymir sleeping in the void, sustained by rivers of milk from Audhumla, while she licks salt blocks and reveals Búri encased in ice. Witness the 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, as they look upon primordial chaos and decide to transform it into an ordered cosmos. Watch as they slay Ymir and begin the meticulous work of transformation, creating the earth, sky, mountains, and seas from the body of the fallen giant. Follow them as they shape the 9 worlds around Yggdrasil, creating homes for gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and finally humans. See Ask and Embla receive the gifts of life, consciousness, and senses, becoming the first human beings. And know that this cosmos, despite all its grandeur and complexity, is destined one day to be destroyed in fire and flood, only to rise again, green and renewed from beneath the waves. The story of Norse creation is ultimately a story about us, about our place in a vast cosmos, about our relationship to forces far greater than ourselves, and about how we choose to live in the face of that reality. It reminds us that we are part of something larger, connected to gods and giants, trees and rivers, stars and earth, all woven together in the great pattern of existence. As you drift towards sleep, let your mind wander through these ancient stories. Picture the yawning void of Ginnungagap, empty and expectant. Feel the cold of Niflheim and the heat of Muspelheim as they reach toward each other across the emptiness. Watch as the frost begins to melt and drip, forming the first living being in the cosmos. See Ymir sleeping in the void, sustained by rivers of milk from Audhumla, while she licks salt blocks and reveals Búri encased in ice. Witness the 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, as they look upon primordial chaos and decide to transform it into an ordered cosmos. Watch as they slay Ymir and begin the meticulous work of transformation, creating the earth, sky, mountains, and seas from the body of the fallen giant. Follow them as they shape the 9 worlds around Yggdrasil, creating homes for gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and finally humans. See Ask and Embla receive the gifts of life, consciousness, and senses, becoming the first human beings. And know that this cosmos, despite all its grandeur and complexity, is destined one day to be destroyed in fire and flood, only to rise again, green and renewed from beneath the waves. The story of Norse creation is ultimately a story about us, about our place in a vast cosmos, about our relationship to forces far greater than ourselves, and about how we choose to live in the face of that reality. It reminds us that we are part of something larger, connected to gods and giants, trees and rivers, stars and earth, all woven together in the great pattern of existence. As you drift towards sleep, let your mind wander through these ancient stories. Picture the yawning void of Ginnungagap, empty and expectant. Feel the cold of Niflheim and the heat of Muspelheim as they reach toward each other across the emptiness. Watch as the frost begins to melt and drip, forming the first living being in the cosmos. See Ymir sleeping in the void, sustained by rivers of milk from Audhumla, while she licks salt blocks and reveals Búri encased in ice. Witness the 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, as they look upon primordial chaos and decide to transform it into an ordered cosmos. Watch as they slay Ymir and begin the meticulous work of transformation, creating the earth, sky, mountains, and seas from the body of the fallen giant. Follow them as they shape the 9 worlds around Yggdrasil, creating homes for gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and finally humans. See Ask and Embla receive the gifts of life, consciousness, and senses, becoming the first human beings. And know that this cosmos, despite all its grandeur and complexity, is destined one day to be destroyed in fire and flood, only to rise again, green and renewed from beneath the waves.